This is lesson 1.4, Dimensioning and Annotation. In this lesson you will learn how to create text. You will learn how to control and edit text. You will learn how to control text formatting. You will learn how to place dimensions. And you will learn how to control dimension formatting. Let's get back to Vectorworks. In this lesson we're going to learn about text and dimensions and how to control these. So let's start with finding our text tool. Here it is here, our text tool. If you're looking for the hotkey, it's key number 1. So click on my text tool. I can create text in horizontal or in a rotated mode. I can also tight fill the text, which is when you put a pattern behind it, it creates a tight fill. I'll show you that in a minute. Here we have the opportunity to use a text style, which I also need to explain later. So let's start by creating some basic text. I'm just going to write this as text. And there we are. That's an easy way to create text. You click once where you want to start the text, you start typing, and then you finish. Now on a keyboard, on a full-size keyboard, there are 2 return keys. There is one near the letters, which on a Macintosh is labeled return. On a Windows machine that's labeled enter. And there's another key, another enter key, near the numeric keypad, which is labeled enter on both a Macintosh and a Windows keyboard. They do not do the same thing. The return key near the letters, or the enter key near the letters, creates a new line of text. Now, I know I've made a spelling mistake, but I'm going to correct it shortly. The enter key near the numeric keypad finishes your block of text and takes you away from all of that. When we look at text here on the menu bar, we can choose the font, we can choose the size, the style, the alignment, the spacing, and so on. There's also a menu item here called Format Text. Now this is the quickest, easiest way to format your text. Instead of going to all of these individually, Format Text opens this dialog box where you can choose the font, the size, the spacing, the style, all at the same time. So I'm going to choose Arial Narrow because that's one of my favorite ones. Let's choose Arial Narrow. We'll make this 12-point text, which is quite common. We won't make it bold, and we'll have the alignment at the top left. So I could make it bold, underlined, shadowed, single spacing, 1.5, and so on. So I make all my choices, then I click on the Save button, and I call this 12-point Arial Narrow. Arial Narrow. There we are, 12-point Arial Narrow. OK. It saves this text style, and I can use this text style anywhere in the documents that I want, anywhere at all. It is really quick. Let's come down here. There's another font that I quite like, so let's just highlight that. T-E-K-T. Tecton Pro Bold. There's another one that I like. Let's make this 20-point. We'll make it bold, and we'll make it center horizontal and center at the top. So let's save this and we'll call it 20-point Tecton. Okay, so that's given me a couple of text styles. Let me go back to my 12-point Arial Narrow. Okay. Now you might notice that that object was selected, and when I went away from that dialog box, it changed to this 12-point Arial Narrow. If I choose Tecton, it'll update, and now it's got the Tecton font on it. Which means that if I have several blocks of this text, I'm just dragging with my Option or Control key held down. If I change that font here, so I've just gone to my Resource Manager here. If your Resource Manager is not open, go to Window, Palettes, just make sure the Resource Manager has a tick. So this is my font here, my text style. Right click, and I can edit that text style. Let's change it to 24-point Arial Narrow. Now you don't have to change the name at the top. You could call it small text, large text. I've just found over the years it's hard for me to remember what I've chosen, so I tend to just call it by its type. So this is Arial Narrow, it's 24-point, it's bold, and OK. I better make that 24-point because that's what I want it to be. OK. Now you'll notice that my text here updated. I can also drag and drop text, so I can drag that text style, drop it onto a block of text, and it will change. If I select that one, it says that it's 12 point. I can change it to 24 point, and there it is, it changes. You might notice the little cross here, that's the insertion point for my text. This is the control point, so it's top left. I change to 24 point. That control point goes to the middle. So that's the center of my text. So those are text styles. We can right click and we can duplicate that. I can call it 20 point. I'll make it 14 point Tekton, because Tekton tends to be a small font. Tekton. Right click, let's edit that, and this isn't Arial Narrow but Tekton again, Tekton Pro Bold, 14 point, make it bold. Don't have to make it bold. I'm going to change that, or I could leave it at top left, but I can change all these settings. Okay, so now I can drag that Tekton, drop it on there, and it changes. So that's quite a handy way of having these resources available. Not only that, but you can also grab resources from your libraries. So if I had favorites here, I could grab this Tekton font from one file, or my text style from one file, and drag it to another. It is very handy, and it means that the text in my entire document that uses this font is the same. So that's how we can grab our text and we can do those changes. So let's just look at this text here. I can change the color of the font. I can change the color of the background. And I'm going to go, it's got tight fill at the moment, so I'm going to add to this. So this is more text. And so you can see the tight font, or the tight background fill, fixes to my font quite closely. If I turn off the tight fill, you can see it's the entire text block has that color to it. If I change that back to a standard Vectorworks color, let's make it white and black for the writing. So there we are. So that's the ability to create text, to format the text, and to create text styles. What about spelling? So if I right click on this, I can check the spelling. And more is not there. So I want it to be that, change it, and my spelling is updated. Now the spelling can also work through the document. So text on the menu bar, check spelling. Let's check the spelling of all my text blocks, all my symbols, all my records, all my worksheets, all my viewports. Or you can just choose which bits you want. You click OK. I found another block here. Let's change that one. And it updated that as well. Now if you've got a large file with a lot of text in it, this can take a long time to check through. Just be careful, be patient, just let Vectorworks do its job. I'm going to get rid of that text and get rid of that text. So that's the ability to create and format text. Let's have a look at our measuring tool. This is a constrained linear dimension tool, and it will put dimensions on my objects. So click at top left, click at top right, move up, click once again, and it places the text there. Click once to start, click once to finish, and click once to place the text. That text is selected, or that dimension is selected, so I can grab that text style, drag it to my dimension, let go, and you can see it's now got the correct formatting. This dimension is selected, so I can go to my resource manager, double click, so just 2 clicks, and that should have assigned that text style to that dimension. Now using text styles with dimensions is very powerful, because when I update this text style, so let's go edit, let's change this to 20 point and we'll make it bold. Okay, and you can see the text on both dimensions change together, which means if you're connecting your text styles to your dimensions on all of your documents, when you update it, all the dimensions in this document will update together. So it's a great way of controlling your text. So I'm back at my constrained linear dimension tool. I'm going to have a look at my constrained chain dimension. So click to start, click to finish, choose where to place that dimension, and then click for the next one and double click to finish. So that's a chain of dimensions. Now the difference is that if I move this dimension, so you notice my cursor changes shape, I click and drag that up, let go of my mouse, it's only moved one dimension. Let's do the same thing here, and you notice that all my chain dimensions are moving together. The other thing is if I double click on that, they've all got the same dimension. Double click on that, double click on that, and so on. If I go to my unconstrained dimensions, if I click between that point and that point, it puts the dimension exactly on that line between those two. Whereas previously we were using the constrained, if I went between there and there, I could put my dimension up that way or across that way, but not on the angle. Let's just choose those dimensions again. We're going to choose the text style over here, 14-point tecton. We can also change the color of my dimension. So I can make it blue, for example. I could change the line weight of it, make it heavy. And I can also change from the architectural style to ASME, or BSI, or DIN, or ISO. And there are several that you can use here. And you can also create your own dimension style if you want. We're not going to cover creating your own dimension style. That's in either the Architect BIM or the Landmark BIM course. You might notice that my dimensions have little green squares next to them. Just here there's little green squares next to my dimensions. That's because I have created dimensions to be associative. If I click here and I choose Document Preferences, I can choose to associate my dimensions to my objects. So I've got here Associate Dimensions Yes and Auto Associate. Just choose the dimensions that we want. Okay. What that means is that when I create a dimension, if I find the corner of an object or the insertion point of an object, it will latch onto that, and if I move this object, my dimensions will move too. You might notice that dimension just stayed in line with my object. This dimension actually updated. I'll just undo that. If I stretch this object, then that dimension updates. If I double click on my dimension number, just up here, double click on the dimension text, it highlights the number, and I can change that to 50 millimeters or 2 inches again, and I've got these 3 blue dots. This is the insertion point, or the control point is on the left. This is the control point in the middle, control point on the right, and if I use my tab key, it will move from one dot to the other. If I enter, it'll make that object 50 millimeters or 2 inches again, and it changes the size of that rectangle. This little dashed line here controls the offset or the length of my witness lines. So I can move that length of the witness line up or down depending on whether I need it to be in a certain place or not. Let's look at these. There it is there. So I click and I move that back. And you'll notice that these 3, because they're chain dimensions, they've all moved together. If I move this one, they still all move. I've covered moving the dimension line. I've covered moving the witness line, this one here. I haven't talked about moving the text. If I click on the text and hold my mouse down, I can move that text across. I can move it up. I can move it underneath the dimension line. I can move it all over the place. So those are very flexible for being able to be moved around, and you can move them around, and if it's a circular dimension you can also move that, but they're very flexible in being able to be moved once you've created them. And you can see that dimension moved, that one moved, that one moved, so all of my associated dimensions moved. Now I'm going to place another dimension. This time I won't go near a corner, so I'm going to click here and I'll go back to a single dimension line. And there, and let's place that dimension. And you'll notice that dimension doesn't have the little green squares because I did not click at the corners. So when I move this rectangle, those dimensions all moved, this one did not, because it was not associated to that object. And remember, the associate dimensions is in your document preferences, which means that every document you open might have a different setting. This is the end of lesson 1.4. In this lesson you learned how to create text, you learned how to control and edit text, you learned how to control text formatting, you learned how to place dimensions, and you learned how to control dimension formatting.